Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Next, Tackling Career Transitions. This is the first of 4 webinars in the Professional Power Up series. I am Becky Picone, and my colleague Michelle Cavalcanti and I will be your hosts for today, and Michelle will be moderating the Q&A session after the presentation. We're excited to get started, but before we begin, I will just quickly remind you of a few things. Please do keep your microphones on mute so that we're all able to hear the presentation clearly. We also have captioning that you can turn on by going to your navigation bar. If you're having any technical issues, please do message me, Becky Picone, privately in the chat. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Barbara and Jay, please send them to Michelle Cavalcanti in a private chat, and she'll ask the questions for you during the Q&A period. We are recording this session, and we'll be sharing it to all of you and anyone who registered who were not able to attend live. So if there are other programs that you're interested in but can't attend, please do register anyway to receive the videos. We are very happy that you joined us today, and I would like to introduce Barbara Grossman and Jay Berger, the amazing duo who make up Headhunter on Tap.
Hi, everyone. We are thrilled to be back. It's March, our new favorite month when we do Professional Power Up.
And we're glad to hear about the response that the program has gotten. We're glad that you are all here today. And without further ado, so we have more time for questions at the end. Let's start the presentation and then field as many questions as we can afterwards.
What we hope you'll take away from today's presentation are 4 basic things: want versus needs, taking your personal inventory, identifying your skills, and we'll get into each one of these in more depth along the way, exploring your options, and ultimately making your case. Essentially, it boils down to the why, what, and how to go about making these career decisions. We love this quote by Michael Fox, life is about circumstance and choice, and we think it's incredibly apt when you start to contemplate making a change. What we hope to do is help define circumstance and choice for you moving forward, give you a better understanding of how to evaluate and factor in all of those aspects when deciding on how to proceed.
Circumstance versus choice resonated for us because where you come from when you're making a transition in your career will really inform your decisions throughout the process. The steps that you take along the way will probably be pretty similar. The timeline, your priorities, your expectations, however, will be different depending upon whether this is something you're choosing to do or a career transition that you're making because of your circumstances. For a long time, I've believed that it's ideal to run to something and not from something, but unfortunately in real life, that's not always the way it works. So even when you don't have that option or opportunity, it's best when you can be grounded in your search and informed and deliberate about the way you go about it. Our experience tells us that the more informed, grounded, and deliberate people are, the better the results they seem to get and feel happy about. We're going to take a moment here to just go through the general types of reasons that people find themselves in a career transition. The first category is broadly progression. You may want to shift in focus, or you may just want to advance your career, or you may be looking for an increase in your salary or total compensation, or even benefits, which could be different from salary. The second category of life changes is something we see more and more frequently and in different ways than we used to, actually. We see people re-entering the workforce after taking a leave for one reason or another. Believe it or not, as often as you might think of people leaving the workforce to care for a young family, we also see people who are taking sabbaticals from their careers to care for an elderly family member or when someone passes away. And that's not as uncommon as you would think anymore. Relocation, certainly since the pandemic, has been a big factor in why people make a change in their career. And sometimes people are just looking for something totally new. That also was a big outcome of the pandemic. We saw a lot of people taking that year or 2 years to re-examine what they were doing and why, and walking away from that experience saying, I want to do something different. Finally, there's layoffs. We all know what layoffs are. Believe it or not, there was a time when layoffs were kind of used as a euphemism for people being terminated and fired. for performance-related issues. But most of you who are listening to this probably don't even remember that. And today, layoffs, by and large, have nothing to do with performance at all. They're more frequently an outcome of a merger or an acquisition, oftentimes automation, which can cause wholesale elimination of job categories, not just positions. And of course, market conditions. And we all know that the market has been incredibly volatile over the recent years, but even over the past several decades, there's been a lot of volatility in the market compared to what it used to be like. This leads us right into a conversation about priorities. In the discussion of wants versus needs will 100% of the time trump wants. This is a step that people often overlook or are not really terribly clear on, but it's critical because needs are kind of the immovable variables, while wants are things you would like, but don't have to have. Now, they're not on your must-have list. And the more time you take to honestly and realistically get very clear about your needs, the more you're able to see what it is that you want and are able to truly do. So looking at needs typically fall into the categories of, a job, a salary. You may need a particular location or to not be very far from your place of work. Right now, it's not uncommon to hear people say, I really need to be able to be in a hybrid situation, or I need to be remote for this reason or that reason, where that was not a viable option previously, it is now. And of course, hours. There are constraints around many people for what hours they're willing to work. And some roles just have hours that are endless or seemingly endless or require weekends or evenings, times that are just not workable for you because of your situation. On the other hand, oftentimes wants are more about a type of position or maybe an industry. Someone's been in a particular industry for a long time and is finding that industry has changed. A lot of people in, for instance, the medical profession are saying, I actually spoke to a neurosurgeon not too long ago who said the practice of being a neurosurgeon 25 years ago when I started is not what it is any longer. And I really don't want to practice this anymore, which was kind of, was fascinating to me. Here's somebody who has deep expertise. He really actually is a, brain surgery. And that's, he doesn't want to do it anymore. Mission and growth are also similar. I want to be more aligned on mission. In some ways, that's a luxury for people. And I want a growth opportunity. Similarly, that's often highly desirable, but again, it's a desire and not a need. So taking the time up front to distinguish for you what is an absolute must-have versus what is a want will better help you to align your goals. It also provides some focus for you and guardrails. In a search that may seem otherwise too open-ended, we often see that people will quickly narrow down their search based on their needs. In wrapping up this conversation, I just want to point out that it's important to keep in mind that there are trade-offs involved in all of these calculations. So going back to the neurosurgeon, for instance, in leaving his profession and getting into the private sector, into industry, something that he's never done, he will very possibly be required to take a salary cut. And he certainly will not likely come in at a level that he has enjoyed in terms of his seniority and his prestige when he makes that move. And it may turn out, it's yet to be determined, that what he wants is unrealistic in terms of what he's willing to trade off. So whether you're looking at trade-offs within needs or within wants or looking at both, sometimes the reality just creates too many boundaries or boundaries that you're not willing to accept and compromises that you're not willing to accept. Sometimes it's perfectly okay. And that's great when it works out. And many, many people make transitions and do make those compromises, but it's important to look at that and to take that into account as you consider your priorities. Please just note that I do have salary highlighted in red here, and that's because it's its own unique conversation. I mean, honestly, who doesn't want to make more money? Just about everyone would be happy to have an increase in salary and would love to increase their salary. So sometimes, actually, that is truly the reason someone is seeking a new position. They feel underpaid, they don't believe they're at market value, they want to change their lifestyle, whatever the real reason is, salary can and sometimes is the real reason people are looking for a change. However, oftentimes salary is really just a shorthand or kind of a mask for the real reason that they're looking for a transition. Very often we run into people who feel like they are not valued where they are. And in the workplace, it's kind of easy to collapse money and value because that's kind of how we measure value is with money. But money may or may not even solve the problem. We'll run into people who have had a salary increase and say, you know, I just got a raise, but it's just not doing it for me. I really, you know, I'm looking for more. Or they will say, if I would only get a raise, then everything would be fine. And as we drill down, we really learn that everything's not fine. They're not happy with their leadership. They don't feel aligned with a mission. It could be any number of things that really aren't working. And it's sort of just easy to say, I'd like to make more money, and a little harder to look beneath the surface and see what's really operating. But it's important to do because you really want to understand what it is you're looking for in your transition. Jay, do you want to take over from here? This is your specialty coming up next.
Thanks, Barbara. Yes, I do love this part. Taking a personal inventory. We're going to look at three aspects of this. We are now, we completed the why, want versus needs, circumstance, and choice. That's kind of the why of career transitions. And now we're getting into the what. What are you? And what do you have? And so we break that down into three areas to kind of explore and define: core attributes, professional narrative, and transferable knowledge. Let me talk a little bit about core attributes. We're going to do a deeper dive into core attributes when we do the resume writing webinar, actually the whole professional narrative construct, which I'm going to talk about a little bit today, but we'll do a deeper dive when we do the authentic resume webinar as well as interviewing webinar down the road. Core attributes. We like to isolate and name what your core attributes are. They are where you are, where one is grounded. It's how you walk around town. Whether you are friendly, whether you are serious, whether you are compassionate, whether you are methodical, whether you are analytical. We like to break these things apart so you have access to them. And we actually use that language to construct resumes because it becomes an authentic representation of you. We also will urge people to be honest with themselves when they come up with these attributes, because what you want to do ultimately is put yourself in a situation where you will more readily be successful. There was a great coach who when they questioned him about what made him so good, he said, I know what my players are best at, not so good at. I know what situations they will thrive in, and I put them in those situations so they will excel. This is something that is not beyond what individuals can do. There's no such thing as bad attributes, by the way. All right. A lot of people aspire to be creative and spontaneous and innovative and dynamic, and they want to be a swashbuckler. If you're not a swashbuckler and you're in a swashbuckling kind of job scenario, you're probably going to be pretty bad at it. All right. And even if you are good at it, you probably won't be happy because you'll have to work twice as hard because it's not who you are. Another thing, if I say methodical and procedural and reliable and steady, a lot of people will say, sounds rather boring. But we use the analogy of if you are in the back of an airplane and the pilot is landing You don't want him to get creative and spontaneous and try to land backwards, all right? Being methodical and being procedural and reliable is something that we look for in an airline pilot, or something that we look for in a brain surgeon, going back to Barbara's gentleman doctor friend. So what we do is we pull these terms out, because what we want you to do is look for jobs where you can align them with the opportunity to be successful. What we end up doing is using your personal attributes, and then we layer in your journey. What is your journey? Your journey is your life experiences. All right, it can be something from your youth, it can be your upbringing, it can be family, it can be part of your job experience. When I say family stuff, it can be constellations of family, it can be events like that, but it could be even if you're an Army brat and have moved around a lot and had to adapt, or emigrated from a different country. With regard to job situations, it could be having lived through downsizing and right sizing, or different situations that you had to face on the job that affect how you go about doing what you do. Because ultimately, if you take your attributes with that journey, you end up with your professional narrative. It's how you go about doing what you do to be successful. I know this is a tough concept for a lot of people to understand. We think that it is very worthwhile when you move forward and present yourself for opportunities, understanding yourself and how to communicate it effectively. We will go into much greater detail in future webinars, especially the one dealing with creating an authentic resume. Now that we figured out who you are, it's time to figure out what you know, all right? And we've broken down the transferable knowledge into a few different sections: the industry and vertical, the function, your skills, and personal. Now, in some cases, if you are making a transition of sorts within your industry, it's pretty straightforward. When you're transitioning outside of your industry or outside of your function, that's when it can become very important to understand how to leverage this knowledge in a way that you can ultimately make your case. When we talk about industry verticals, you may be in the consumer products field, energy, higher ed, government, advertising. You have specific industry knowledge. And oftentimes when you're transitioning, and let's say you want to go from an accounting function to a marketing function where you have to sell yourself, it'll be a lot easier if you're doing it within an area where you have some expertise, like consumer products or advertising. If you're going from an accounting role to a marketing role in advertising, that'll be a lot easier than if you're changing industry and function. Now, functions, what are we talking about? Marketing, accounting, human resources, sales, operations, you name it. When we talk about skills, we're being a little bit more specific. And we're talking about maybe project management, team building. You have strong communication, writing, communication skills, presentation skills, strong quantitative skills or technical skills. Those sometimes are easy to transition to different industries, totally. So what you are looking for is a formula of sorts to put together to be able to make your case. And then there are also attributes that we pick up in our personal lives. I mean, you may be involved in politics, you may be involved in sommelier and know about wine, you may be in school board, local elections, or gardening if you want to open up a garden center. These are various things that you can pull together as well. Once you have an inventory of your transferable knowledge, it's almost like a blueprint as to what might be available. And we oftentimes will talk to people. We had a situation of a gentleman who came to us during the pandemic, was laid off, who was in hospitality. And he said, I'm at a loss. I'm a hospitality guy and nobody wants hospitality people. Well, we sat down and started to build his transferable knowledge and his professional narrative, as a matter of fact. But he was outgoing, he was charismatic, he was organized. He was a bit of a risk taker of sorts, but his transferable knowledge was he had worked on global initiatives. He was strong in project management. He was strong in communication and team building. And we took those skills and took them outside of hospitality and made him more of a program management type of individual, not focused mostly on his industry, but focused on his skills and functions. And that's how he was able to make his case. And actually, he got hired by a biotech company that was working on some international global initiatives and in a program management role. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to Barbara.
Okay, armed with what your priorities are and a knowledge of what you have to work with, you're now ready to take a look at what you need in order to get where you want to go. Typically and logically, the more moderate the transition you want to make, the more likely it is that you have the skills, the education, the experience, the training, the background, going back to what Jay was discussing, the transferable knowledge that you really need in order to do this new job. Probably, although not 100% of the time, but probably if you're looking to make a very large transition, a radical change, you will have to acquire something in terms of your skill set, maybe more education. There may not be a way to get more experience, and therefore you may be looking at giving up something in terms of your income. Back to the neurosurgeon who wants to move out of being a clinician to working in the private sector. And oftentimes, again, not always, nothing's absolute, the time frame for a transition will be considerably longer. It just takes more time to find the right fit. It's just not a one-to-one alignment. So the more one-to-one you are in terms of fit, the easier that transition is to make and the less there is for you to acquire or do in order to be able to do it. This is not in any way to discourage you from making a radical transition. It's also not to suggest that you have a binary choice here, either a moderate change or a radical change. In fact, you can pursue both at once. And that oftentimes is what people who are seeking a larger change do. They know they need a change more immediately from where they are, so they seek a more moderate change in that way, and at the same time pursue a more radical change, knowing that it may be a job or two later from where they are currently. It is important to recognize that the more radical the change, the more likely it is you'll be making more compromises in terms of salary and level, and even potentially location. It'll take longer, and you may well need to use more of your own personal connections and make new connections, network with people in order to make that happen. So I was working with this woman who was a very senior level nonprofit executive, and she really needed to make a change from where she was. She'd just been there a long time, and it wasn't that she didn't like it. It was just time. She'd been there for too long. She was perfectly happy to go into another nonprofit in a leadership role, but she also had this kind of quiet wish to get into what she called a design build environment, basically working for a firm that does both the architecture and the construction for clients. And she looked at her transferable knowledge, and she felt that her project management, her client-facing skills, and her experience working with multiple stakeholders, which she had done over these past 20 years, would transition well into that environment, and she could easily see herself working in that space. What she was less confident about was whether or not anybody else would be able to see that she would be able to take on that challenge. So she essentially took on both searches at the same time and decided whichever one came first was where she was going to go. And she was really thrilled that the design build opportunity was the first one to come into fruition. It did require that she take a pretty significant salary cut, and she was not at the level that she would have been at if she had continued on the nonprofit path, but she was committed, and she thought that for her, the time was right in her career and that the gratification she was going to receive would be well worth it. So she took the leap. And it's certainly possible for you to do the same thing. Just be aware that the more radical the change, likely the larger the compromise is, as well as the longer the time frame. I'm going to start off this discussion with a pitfall to avoid. It's very tempting for most people, or many people, to dive right into the application process once they've decided that a change is in order, regardless of whether it's a moderate change or a radical change or even a just simply incremental change. And typically in a career transition situation, this will unsurprisingly lead to a lot of frustration and probably not very positive results. So we encourage you to take a very deep breath here and step back. And as you've gone through this process of identifying where you want to go and what you might need in your mind to get there, you now want to do your research, which will involve also having conversations with people. So to give you an example, we're going to go back to the neurosurgeon I spoke about earlier. He's certain he doesn't want to be in clinical practice. He has, in that context, done a variety of types of things with regard to administration, advocacy, board work, etc., that are related to healthcare, but not to clinical work specifically. And he knows he has transferable skills, but he's really not truly clear where he might be able to fit in. So he knows he wants to make this change. He knows he wants it to be within the healthcare field and in some private sector position, but he's not sure what people will accept in terms of his ability to do something and in turn, what he would be best at. He's just unfamiliar with the landscape in a very specific way coming from this perspective. So I encouraged him to schedule 20 conversations with people he does and maybe doesn't know to start to learn what other people are doing, what some people maybe have left clinical practice as well. Just a variety of people, sort of anyone who seems like they would be relevant to this pursuit that he's in, and talk with them. Very little about anything to do with career search happens inside of the confines of your own mind. Almost everything happens out there. It's all in conversation with other people, even getting a job ultimately because you're interviewing. For the most part, that's the way it happens. And in the context of having these conversations, you're going to then most likely want to go back and do some further research about what you've learned from a conversation. It may be researching into a specific company. It may be researching types of positions. You may be looking at position descriptions to see what's actually out there. And we always encourage you, when you're looking at a position description, to look at the whole description, not just the requirements or the qualifications, which in this situation undoubtedly will have probably very few of, but look at the actual summary and see if you can really do what they're looking for and want to do it, and what it might be that you need in order to get there. And then perhaps go back and have a conversation with someone else about whether or not it's reasonable or realistic to think that you can actually do that and make a case. This process is iterative. One step will take you to the next. It's going to be kind of an unguided tour, but the process itself will lead you through. And at some point, I think you will know what you need to know in order to begin to formulate your resumes and choose actually the path. Having now explored your options sufficiently and focused your search, you're ready to go ahead and craft your professional narrative and prepare a resume or several resumes, depending on how many different paths you really want to pursue. Our next webinar is dedicated to both of these things. That's specifically what we will be covering. So I'm only going to touch upon it very superficially here and say that it needs to be done. Stay tuned for the next one to know more about how to actually go about doing that in a way that will get you where you want to go in this transition. The final step of this process, and it's one that largely goes undistinguished, and people don't see it as a clear step, but trust me and us, it is a clear step in the process. You're going to need to make your case. In the process of transitioning particularly, it's always true when you're applying for any new job, but when you're really transitioning, it is key. And the larger the transition, the more critical this is. This also happens to be one of Jay's favorite conversations.
Thank you, Barbara. You've done the hard work now. You basically looked at wants versus needs. You've begun targeting types of opportunities that might be appropriate or very, very appealing to you. You've looked at your transferable skills, what you might bring to that next environment, maybe even look to strengthen some skills by either taking courses or reading up on things. And we're at the point now where it's time to make your case. In a situation where you have very few transferable skills and you're taking a big leap to do something that is pretty radically different from what you've done before, there's no substitute for enthusiasm. In this case, you can talk about your excitement about getting involved in the industry, the amount of dedication you will put into the effort, demonstrate that you've done reading and research work and gained as much knowledge as possible so you'd be prepared to come in and hit the ground running. And all you essentially need is an opportunity because you know you will excel. That's the case you're making. If you have transferable skills, you want to apply those skills to the position that you might be applying for. In the case of our hospitality person, 80% of what he talked about on his interviews were the programs he put in place, the management of teams, the winning over of people who were reticent to go along. And he was applying that to program project management positions in any organization. He made the case how he could be a valuable asset to that new organization. That is making the case. People want to know why they should hire you and not why you were so wonderful doing something else. They want to know how your skills are applicable to what they're doing right now. And part of the important aspect of your job search is if you can't make a case for why somebody should hire you, it's going to be very difficult for that person to bring you on board. Something to remember is that when you're interviewing for a position, the person sitting across from the desk wants to hire you. They have a need that they're looking to fill. And what they're hoping for is that you will tell them why you would be an asset and why you could make their life easier. That is basically what making your case is all about. Putting together for them in a concise way while you will bring value to the organization, the team, and the overall mission. In wrapping up, it's time to execute your search. Today we touched mostly on what to consider when going through career transitions. In future webinars, we're going to talk about creating an authentic resume, how to target a resume, a lot about professional narrative, which we touched on today, which we think is a core to being successful in being able to target jobs, appropriate jobs, as well as making your case. We're also going to talk about sourcing and looking for appropriate positions, how to look through position descriptions, how to read and how to apply and how to get noticed. And then the last thing we will talk about in our last webinar is preparing for the interview, what to expect, demystifying the interviewing process.
All right, so thank you for that presentation. We are now on to the Q&A part of this virtual event today. I just wanted to remind people that they can send their questions to me personally, Michelle Cavalcanti, in the chat. I also wanted to make an announcement to remind people that if they would like to further ask questions after this Q&A, we are having a job talk scheduled for noon to 1 o'clock ET time, and that is on Friday, the 8th. And we encourage you to come because if you're not familiar with Job Talks, it's really an opportunity to speak to Jay and Barbara directly. It's ask me anything kind of format, so there's no presentation and you get to really dig into your personal situations with them. They ask a lot of follow-up questions, which we will not do today. So please do join us. We will be putting a link in the chat, and we will also be following up with the video from today, as well as the links for the further for the next webinar, which was referenced several times for the creating an authentic resume. So we hope everybody will tune in or at least register so that you receive the videos. All right, now we'll get on to the good stuff. We received a lot of questions. So we'll see how many, we have a good amount of time for Q&A today. So I'm just going to start right at the top of my list here. Is providing a cover letter recommended if I am trying for a radical change in employment? Like to help explain why?
May I do that? You want to?
Also,
You start.
so cover letters are tricky. It's not so much about whether or not it's a good idea for you to write one to explain why you're good or could be good in this situation. That makes good instinctive sense. But the reality is they're not always read. So you have to kind of be aware of whether or not it's requested and whether or not it might be read. Do you want to add? to
Yeah,
that,
I'd
Jen?
say it's essential when you're making a radical change, because when I get a resume from somebody and I'm like, why are they even applying? I want to know that they know what the job is, rather than they're just sending out resumes randomly. And what I'm looking for is for them to make a case. I'm looking for them to tell me why they want to do this job when they haven't done it before. I mean, the location's close to home. I mean, it's a pretty lame reason, but tell me why you think you'd be good at this and why you want to do it. I want to know that to validate why I might reach out to you, especially when you're not in the sweet spot of what I'm looking for.
That being said, I think it's most important. So I don't disagree with you about that, Jay, but what you really don't know is whether or not anybody's going to read that letter.
No, I
And
mean,
it's important that your resume be crafted in such a way that it's not a generic resume from what you used to do that you're now using for what you want to do. And also that the cover letter is not a generic cover letter. It needs to be really specific. So
exactly. That's the part 2 of this. You want to make sure that your resume is geared in the direction you want to go and speaks to why you might be appropriate. Transferable skills have to be there. We also will talk in the resume when we talk about constructing resumes about a profile summary on the top, which allows you to really point to the direction that you want to go, highlighting what you've done, but also point it in the direction that you want to go as well.
right.
Thank you for that. There's another question that came in about radical change, so I'll just continue in this way. I'm attempting a radical change, but also searching for roles in my prior field. So they're wondering, using LinkedIn, how do you represent, both perspectives? This is a hard one. I know it's that you're nodding your head because it's something that comes up a lot in our conversations. How do you appeal to people, obviously, in both industries, in both areas?
You have to be careful about what sort of tagline you use under your name, right? And keep it broad enough that it won't preclude you from one or the other. And then use the about section to talk about yourself. And it's a balance, it's a tricky balance, but you have to balance it and sort of keep a little of both in there. There's no good formula for how to do it. It usually takes some iteration and best to have a couple of people see it. Like I would, LinkedIn doesn't let you practice a draft and not say it, you kind of have to do everything real time. So I would recommend sort of checking it out and having people while you're doing it, like lined up to read what you've written and see if it's working.
Yeah, and I would lean a little bit towards what you've done, because otherwise your resume may look a little empty if you're going too much in the direction of where you want to go,
Right.
and you don't have a lot of those skills, and you're still applying for things within where your expertise is. So I'd lean a little bit more towards where your main expertise is, and then hopefully have some hints. That's where you're saying strike a balance
Right.
of why you would be open to this new venture. And also that's where the cover letter comes in, and making your case and reaching out in a lot of different ways, because, well, we'll talk about that another.
Yes, and unfortunately, to your point, Jay, the LinkedIn format doesn't really give you a lot of opportunity to reformat, right? So you can't create sort of a functional LinkedIn profile. It's always going to be chronological because that's the way they have it set up, and you have to sort of follow along. So you're right that it probably works best to lean a little more, have the balance lean towards where you've been, but somehow work in where you want to go.
You want
And
to
it-
throw in the LinkedIn thing about being open to
Oh yeah,
to-
you certainly want to make sure that you're coded open to work on LinkedIn. And there are two ways to do that. And we'll cover that in our,
Yeah.
in our next, I think it's our next webinar where we talk about it, but you definitely want to code yourself properly so that you're open to work.
There are 3 different levels. So there's one that's kind of like,
2 levels.
well, the horse collar,
That's
and then there's
totally
none.
open.
Yeah,
And then
there's
there's,
yeah,
oh, and then there's
2
none.
different open to works,
Yeah.
and then there's none. Right.
Right.
So we'll talk about that.
There's one that allows you to be open to work for recruiters to find you, but that it's not seen on your profile. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's
And
right.
what that really means, the translation of that, because it's a little tricky, is that people with recruiter platform, which is the platform that Jay and I use for recruiting purposes, and so do lots of people who are internal recruiters for their companies, that it's on that platform, not on just the regular personal platform.
And we're more apt to reach out to people who are coded that way than people who are not coded that way. And if you're looking to make a transition or even move within your field, to be open is like, okay, it's my,
Might be receptive,
Yeah.
but if you are open to work and everyone sees it, it means you are you're in an active search.
But that's going to be good to learn more about that in the next couple of weeks. Moving on to making a career switch from academic research. This one comes up so much, doesn't it, during job talks, to the corporate world. Specifically, how do you translate the relevance of your experience on a resume and in a cover letter?
depends upon the academic work.
Right.
So I mean, if you're in liberal arts, it's one set of skills, and if you're in sciences and research, there's another set of skills.
Or administration, if you're not in,
Or
if you're, it
administration.
depends on whether you're faculty or administrative.
Yeah,
So it really depends on what you do, but based on what you do, you will be pretty much using your functional skill set rather than
yeah.
and so you want to look beneath the surface, like not so much I teach a course, but what does it take to teach a course, right? You put together curriculum, you are good at presenting, you have skills in, I'm sure, or well, most people have skills in organization. I'm sure we all have had our professors who didn't. But you want to look at those underlying skills, and those are going to be the skills that you're going to use in your new resume geared towards wherever it is you want to go.
And if you're in the sciences, you're obviously more than likely you have quantitative skills and analytical skills.
Good research skills.
You know, and you may have good writing skills or not, but so what you want to do is what are those transferable skills, see how they will apply, and that's what we get to make the case. When we talk a good bit about reading job descriptions, and Barbara mentioned it in the presentation, you don't want to read the requirements, you want to read what the job is that needs to get done. Because sometimes they're going to say 4 years working in blah, blah, blah. You've done something totally different, but you have the skill set necessary to complete the task. Even though you haven't worked within that industry, you can still make your case.
And it works. We know that because we've had examples even here at the university, working with alumni. We know that it works to move from academic to other industries and other positions. So another question I have regarding kind of that's in the same area. So when you're talking about upskilling or you're talking about these, like if you don't have the transferable skills, what are your thoughts about upskilling or like doing more certifications or taking a class, or, do you think it's important to show those kinds of initiatives, to get a job? Like you as executive recruiters, do you look at things like that? That's a long question, sorry.
Our favorite answer is always, it depends.
I know.
No, I'll be more definitive. I'll be more definitive. Definitely. If I see somebody who wants to make a radical change or whatever, a more of a riskier shape, bigger change, I want to see that they put some effort into it. Not that all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, I think I want to do this. Did you take a course? Did you do any reading? Did you do any research? So that's the least of what you can do to prepare. You can't expect to walk into something when you don't have any experience and have somebody totally train you. Now, the caveat there is you may have enough transferable skills where somebody says, oh, they're going to
be
bring all
easy.
these other skills. So I'll give them that last bit of training they need so they understand my industry, or they understand how this role operates, because they do have quantitative skills and communication skills or some other knowledge that they bring in.
I want to be, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit here,
No,
because
don't.
that's what we do on occasion. I think it's important to be very focused. I generally hate the word upskilling. I just have like a visceral reaction against it.
Okay,
And I say that because a lot of people either certification collect or degree collect, and that's not good. It's not helpful. And in fact, it kind of looks, I know someone who was recently, I was working with someone recently who wanted to get into like a user experience role and had no training whatsoever, no experience whatsoever. And she was going on LinkedIn and taking all these little LinkedIn certification things and thinking that that was going to make a difference. And it wasn't. It was not relevant
Yes.
at all.
Too much of anything
Too
is,
much.
of
So I
anything is
just
not
wanted-
good.
I
Yeah,
just
you're right.
want
You're
to
right.
Point that out is that's like a little bit of a pitfall.
We have people who come in and they have taken several certifications or whatever, and they say, okay, I have these certifications. Do you think I should do this now? We go, no, it's time to apply these
Get
things
some
and go,
experience.
you don't need any more. You have enough.
That's-
You have the requisite things to make your case.
Right.
And so go out there and make your case rather than just gather these, because it comes across as like,
I can
I'm never,
study a lot.
I will never be good enough, or I will never know enough to make this transition.
Yeah. That's my concern about that.
so for somebody who hasn't searched for a job in over 10 years, what are the most useful resources out there?
Headhunter on Tap being delivered by University of Rochester.
The only school that's got a program that's live like this that we know of.
The network, right? University of Rochester network.
Alumni networks for sure.
The resources, it's not, it's stay with us through the program. You're gonna get a deep dive. We're gonna go through the full life cycle of looking for a job
Yeah.
this month, and you'll get a lot of the basics. What we find is that there's so much information out there, you can get overwhelmed by it. And you get lost in it. It's kind of like saying, I want to learn something, and you read, I'm old, you read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica to gain some knowledge. So that's overkill. So you want to target what you need to move forward. And we're going to cover a lot of things. I don't mean to be self-serving here, but what we like to say is we provide answers, not just more information. So when you're saying what are the resources, Google, baby, YouTube, you're going to be overwhelmed with resources, opinions.
I think
So-
at the end, I actually think good conversations with people who are related to or in the field you're looking to get to make a change into or just do a search in are the
Mhm.
best resources. Conversations are your number one really good resource.
I'll make a plug right now for the Meliora Collective because it's a great source for finding people to have those informational interviews. And I know you both are, about the Meliora Collective, but anybody that hasn't joined, we'll put the link in there. It's for the University of Rochester community, and you're able to find alumni, parents, students, graduate students, faculty, and staff. And it really is being used that way you can filter by who you're looking for and reach out to people. It's not cold calling. It's like LinkedIn for our community. And it's just a really nice way to be able to reach out to somebody directly to say, I'd love to learn more about this industry or, something specific that you see in their profile.
I want to
Yeah, go ahead.
Don't be too, you know what a job search is? It's having conversations. It's having conversations saying, I have something to offer and I'm curious if you need my skills, or I have something to offer and I'd like to offer you my skills. So if we demystify that and not make it a validation of whether we're good or bad, a test, grads, freak out about interviews, and it's like, just go talk to people. And if you click it, Michelle, I'm going to say it again, it's like dating. You go out
Don't
there,
say it.
and if you connect, it's easy. People come out of interviews and they say, it was the easiest interview I ever had. It was just like a conversation. We go, yeah, sometimes that works. So
And
Right.
as far as the just platforms, just, you know, search engines, are you LinkedIn fans? Are you Indeed.com fans? Are there other ones that you are particularly fond of or think of as being better?
LinkedIn is definitely better than Indeed. It's more personal, and in my opinion, I think the closer.
I think Indeed scrubs jobs from a lot of different boards.
Indeed, well, they're an aggregator
yeah,
more than a
so-
personal connector. I mean, you use everything at your,
That's it.
use everything that's available to you for sure. The closer you can make personal connections, the better.
Groups.
Ultimately.
Talk
Oh,
about groups for
on-
this person
Yeah, we'll
in LinkedIn.
cover this a little more in a later webinar too, but LinkedIn allows you to join at least 50. I recently heard it was unlimited. I don't know. I haven't validated that personally. Number of groups. And most people don't bother with groups on LinkedIn, but they're kind of a little secret weapon, because once you join a group, I believe you're a first degree connection to everyone in that group, or at least second. And people also post jobs in groups.
Yes, so if you're a
and-
supply chain guy and you join a supply chain group, if you're a purchasing guy, there are purchasing groups. So there's groups for every kind of, you know, industry out there. And once you're part of that, even if you're in technology and you have one area of, you know, programming or, you know,
And there's
Join
often
that
more
group.
than one group for your industry related work, but there's also
they post a
personal.
lot inside there because that's the best place to post. It's free. And everybody in there is
Is-
a potential target of what they want to hire.
But there's also groups that are like the University of Rochester has a group on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn. There are alumni groups. There are groups for people with affinity interests. Join all of them, because you never know where one conversation will lead you to the job you want or another, you know? So yeah, use
Really good advice.
possible. Good idea.
Uh, So the next question is about soft skills.
Mhm.
And again, as you are executive recruiters, sort of wondering how do you suggest that people brush up on their soft skills? And then what are employers looking for as far as, because we always hear this, you know, it's not a lot of people are actually looking after the pandemic and all of these things. They're really looking for people that have these kind of soft skills. And what are the red flags for employers? You know, for somebody who may not be who may not be strong in this area.
So I just read something yesterday on a website for a company that does training, right? And their whole thing is that soft skills are the new hard skills, which of course is self-serving to a company that does training. But it's important, first of all, you're still going to need the hard skills for any job. You're not going to get a job as a software engineer if you're not capable of coding. You might get a job doing data analysis if you're not a data analyst, but not at the back end of that, only at the front end. So hard skills are still important. No one here would want to have a surgeon who did not have the requisites to do surgery. Like, just be realistic about that. That being said, some jobs really require skills like communication, like analysis, critical thinking, problem solving. Writing is a very desirable skill in a lot of jobs.
Oh, I was just thinking, because soft skills, it depends on what the soft skills are, because some soft skills can be developed. And I was thinking to myself, I can't write a whit. Barbara's a brilliant writer.
No, I wouldn't
So
go that
she
far.
handles all the writing for I put something down and she makes it sound like English. Now, could I develop that skill? Very possibly. It would take some time. It would
I
take
don't know.
several master's degrees at the University of Rochester.
A lot
But
of,
more than likely, you know, that's a whole, but that's where,
of course,
that's where professional narrative or core attributes come in. Because there's some things that I'm very good at, and there's some things that I'm not quite so good at. So I want to focus on career or areas where where I can lean into my strengths. And so I guess I would answer it, you know,
it's best to identify the soft skills that you actually know you have that you're good at. And that takes a lot of honest personal self-reflection, and maybe some conversations with people who know you well.
yeah, if you're outgoing, okay, you can handle those jobs. If you're an introvert, you're not going to go into opportunities where you have to interact a lot with people, or
I mean, you
especially difficult people.
But and you have to decide if it's something you want to learn and develop, or not. I don't, what concerns me is brushing up on soft skills is kind of tricky.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Some skills you certainly can and you can hone and you can, because, I mean, lots of people hate to present.
What specific soft skills you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about how to go about navigating that or using those things.
A big one is a lot of people hate to do public speaking and presenting. That's a skill that can actually be developed
Yes.
with practice. So there are examples of skills that can, and probably examples of skills that are much more difficult.
All right.
Good opportunity.
We have about 3 minutes left. What I'm going to say, I'm going to do one more question. We have a couple more questions after that. If people would like to stay on a little bit longer, we will go to as long as it takes to get through the questions, but not past 1:15. And then we do invite you again to join the very personal kind of Q&A on Friday for Job Talks. So this one is talking about and that people are welcome to leave when they need to leave. Obviously, that's why we're mentioning it now.
Lock the doors. Don't let them leave.
So this one is about, it's a long question. I think this was actually a very good one for Job Talks, but I'm going to just mention, I'm just going to mention it to see if we can get a little bit of an answer for this person. I have a nonlinear career trajectory, and I'm wondering how to leverage it for a mid-senior level role when I've made so many pivots. So the person goes on to say that in college, they were pre-med with a public health major, decided medicine wasn't for them. They went into healthcare marketing for 3 years, and now they're working for a market research agency. So basically, they don't want to stay there either. And they don't really have a business background. And they've applied to many jobs, but they're not making it to the interview stage. And I think this person is kind of implying that it's because of all of the nonlinear, the pivoting and such. So would you be able to give a little bit of advice for this person?
Let me do.
You look like you're chomping at the.
I'm chomping at the bit. Well, because Barbara had a linear, a non-linear career before she spent the last several decades in search.
Before you placed me a
What's
few times.
interesting is you can look at your background as being problematic, or you can look at your background as being quite unique and different, and which qualifies you for positions that other people probably wouldn't be qualified for. You can also look at the experience that you had as mistakes because I didn't want to do it, or, oh, you know what, I did this. This was great. And you brought it from your first job to your second position. You were able to make that pivot, and they saw some value in what you did beforehand. And then now you gathered a new set of skills. Okay, now how can I leverage all of my experience in a new role? So there's a part that you want to get creative about, and there's a part about being able to make your case as a unique candidate and differentiate yourself from the normal candidate who came up with let's be negative about the other person. Not one of those boring routes where they just started here and then went up step and then became a little bit more experienced. No, you have all of this wealth of experience in a lot of different areas that you can bring to the forefront.
So I'll answer that just a tiny bit differently as well. I don't disagree, but you're always the bull and I'm always the bear.
Mm.
And that's just who we are,
Yeah,
right?
not Taurus.
True. It's also possible that this person's resume is not really crafted for the position they want to get into, using the previous work as an empowerment, as Jay's
Right.
talking
In a
about.
positive way.
It's also, that's one possibility that occurs to me right away. Another, because if they're not getting to the interview stage, that means, right, they're not being considered at all. It's also possible that they're shooting too high in terms of level. So if you're going to pivot into something, sometimes you can't really go in at the level you want to.
If this person wants to email us, Becky, if you can put our email in, if you want to email your resume to us, just with a little note that you were the one asking this question, and then come back on Friday,
We'll
we
talk
can
about it.
probably, just cover it and to the benefit of everybody. We can share with everybody where you might be on track or where you might be missing out on that. But
And we don't have to
and
do
we
it that
don't,
way.
you don't
but-
need to be that exposed to whatever, but we'll
Yeah.
just offer that.
Well,
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Again, if anybody would like to leave, we thank you for coming and we look forward to you attending more of our webinars this month. On to the next one, which is actually a nice way to go after the one you just answered. How do you determine long-term impact of taking a lesser position or salary cut in a potential new job? Can you realistically move up quickly or, back to where you were if you take that job on? Or do you, what is your advice in that case?
I don't know.
To get your foot in the door, sometimes you'll take a position that isn't to the level you are currently, and then what is the long-term impact of taking on a lesser role?
You want to be honest when you're taking the role, talking about your timeframes, and you actually want to be considerate of the person that is giving you this opportunity. Because what happens is I will have a lot of people, I'll say, hey, this guy's willing to take a step back to take this role. I say, Jay's going to come in here in 6 months, he's going to be bored and he's going to be out of here.
You're
I
viewed as
don't
a
wanna-
flight risk.
I need somebody who's going to be here. Listen, there's opportunities here, but I need somebody who's going to be in this role for a year to two, because I don't want to have to fill this in 6 months. So that's where you have to, be careful or be honest. I'm looking for a place with this quick career growth. I know I'm going to hit the ground running. I'm going to quickly come up to speed, and I think that I can contribute more greatly. How quickly can I expect to move up?
Sometimes, I mean, I have I've had the exact same
We're big on
experience.
honesty.
Yeah, I've had the same experience. I work with a learning and development team at McKinsey, and they're wonderful. And they will actually consider, sort of they're an unusual team. They'll consider people with different backgrounds, sort of, as long as they fit. But level's tricky, and they will often say, in fact, I had a candidate a couple of years ago who had been at a director or management level in a different type of environment, was willing to come in at a very entry, specialist level, not entry level, but specialist level. And they interviewed her and said, she's just not going to be happy. She's just way overqualified for work. And she was disappointed. It was she had a lot of personal circumstances that made the job very appealing in the moment, but they just refused to consider her. Within 6 months, they called her back. They called me back and said, we have a manager role, would she be interested? And she did apply, and she was hired. So I think you have to be you do need to be honest about your time frame. If you have personal circumstances that you can see for the next couple of years, for instance, that make a job at a lower entry level appealing for you, you might want to share those without being without being detailed about it or giving up, being too personal.
Right.
But it might make sense to share and say, my timeline is really like X number of years, but then you have to really mean it.
Or I have to step back for a little bit because I have a child that's going through whatever, so
Or
I
parents,
can't travel as much, so this job is fine. This works for me right now for the next
Exactly.
so much time though. Yeah.
But what's the long-term impact? It's hard to say, right?
Yeah.
On how you
Opportunity.
perform and opportunities in the company. I mean, a lot of people were hired into, let's say, a big tech company 2 or 3 years ago, only to find themselves, thinking that they would have a lot of opportunity, only to find themselves in contractions. It's really unpredictable.
Yeah, and in that case, I mean, what is your advice for people who find themselves, when people all of a sudden realize, oh, we can't keep all of those people on, when you're putting that in a resume, is that just something that you're very honest about, that there was downsizing or that there was
Absolutely.
circumstances? And so you say that you should be able to do that without any problems in your resume.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're incredibly talented people who are out of work. for a
Mergers and
while,
acquisitions,
or whatever.
private equity situations. I mean, there's
Especially mergers and
contraction everywhere.
merger and acquisition. It's not a matter of how talented you are. It's like you're part of the team we just acquired. Bye.
Yeah.
And so we have our own guy, and we don't
need you.
Thank you very much. So it's
Absolutely be honest about that. That's for sure. You want to.
private equity has, I want to be careful here.
Because we don't have any people are.
We don't know how many private equity people we have on this line right now. They create so much turmoil in the marketplace because they're buying companies, they're growing those companies, and
They've
then at
got
the first.
PPP on the
and-
one
And then
hand,
it's the first opportunity to cash out, or they have a cash out price, and then they sell the companies. And so what happens is, and that moves the company or downsizes the company,
but
or
they
they sell
do
off
create-
assets, so.
it's not all negative. They do create growth opportunity as well.
Yep.
Because sometimes there are several private equity acquisitions that are growth acquisitions before they sell, but you know the ultimate goal is to sell. So you have to kind of have your eyes open when you go into those kinds of situations. And I mean, it's hard to find companies that are not involved in that.
But, you know, but, yeah.
Yeah, so yes, you absolutely should.
There's a lot
think
of
so.
people who have lost their jobs who are quite talented, and the industry knows it.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody out there knows it, so nobody
it's
immediately
not a
assumes
secret.
that there was downsizing. And we recommend that if there was a merger, or there was a downsizing, or there were layoffs, or they outsourced or sold the division, you put it on the resume.
Yeah.
To show why you are no longer at that company.
We know a few people, I mean, it's not all that uncommon, especially in certain areas where people have had 4 or 5 jobs in the last, let's say, 10 years. And they say, I have never left a company. These companies have just left me.
I placed Jacqueline, who I just had lunch with the other day.
Yeah.
I placed a woman who came to me, it was for a director of HR position. And she said, tell me, you know, I was telling her about the opportunity and all that. She says, and I said, it's privately held, you know, it's privately owned. She said, thank God. She said, the last 3 firms I worked for were owned by private equity concerns, and they ended up selling every one. And she felt a little betrayed. She felt like, I get them squared away, I get them in order, I get things working well, and then they sell them. So. another tip.
Okay. That's very interesting. I think I think this is actually a good stopping point. I think the questions have slowed down, so I think we might be in a good place to wrap up here. So at this point, I'm just going to thank Barbara and Jay for our kickoff event. And I know that we'll have a very good showing again for registration for our Authentic Resume webinar next week. Thank you again for this wonderful presentation and for all of the wonderful answers to these questions. And we look forward to seeing everybody on Friday. And if we don't see you Friday, we'll see you next Wednesday. So we'll see you though, both. So thank you very much.
Sure will. Can't get away from us, Michelle.
All righty. We'll see you on Friday.